Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives.
Hi, welcome and thanks so much for listening. Our guest today is a change maker who earnestly believes we are all capable of the extraordinary and attitude is a choice. Having only just survived a massive paragliding accident at the age of 25, he went on to climb Africa's 5 highest mountains along with his wife Taryn as part of a sponsored expedition they organised to promote cultural and environmental awareness. He firmly believes each day is a gift, not a given. And his reason for surviving is to help others find personal inspiration and build a better world. A confused engineer, he has strived to make the world a better place, though personalities as an explorer, renewable energy professional, and now also a speaker. He is the author and photographer of numerous published works. Please welcome Shane Quinnell.
So Shane, we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you on board today. We first met you in Sydney in March. You have a terrific story to tell us. Where do you want to start? There's so much to say.
So first of all, thanks very, very much for having me on board, guys. It's really exciting to be chatting to both of you again. And I suppose from my personal side, I'm really inspired by what you guys have done building up Posh and Pool since we last met. I suppose from my side, the biggest thing is talking about Glide to Soar, which is a methodology or a framework that I've been building up over the last sort of 5 years, which really to me is a way that I've tried to change my psychology or change the way that I'm seeing the world to build into finding more sort of personal success.
Where did the inspiration come from for this metaphor?
So ironically, I actually first learned the idea of gliding to soar when I was quite literally at the bottom of the deepest hole I've ever been in, lying in a hospital bed, unable to move a couple of weeks after having a very major paragliding accident back in about 2016, so 2 weeks before my 26th birthday. And the premise was that I'd done quite a lot of paragliding over the years that preceded that, and I'd done quite a lot of other adventure sports, and it to an extent was a big part of my life. And the one day just happened to be flying in a straight line, the mountain range sort of stretching off the horizon, and was just reveling in the curve of the world, when suddenly I got hit by this little mini cyclone that we termed dust devil, which then collapsed my wing and sent my stomach through my mouth and me into the mountain. And then the rest sort of was history, I suppose.
So Shane, that's a horrendous thing to go through. You had a horrific accident. What were the feelings and emotions that were going through your head at that time?
It's interesting with these kind of accidents. I think it very much depends on who you are and how your body reacts. But interestingly enough, when my wing first collapsed, it was this almighty bang, and my whole wing just almost imploded as the front of the wing just kind of collapsed inwards. So I remember my stomach feeling like it flew straight through my mouth, and my eyes obviously shot open, and the adrenaline started cranking because you're aware that you're in a pretty dangerous situation. And it was strange that the world seemed to almost speed up and slow down at the same time. So my initial reaction was, okay, I'm in trouble. I need to basically just figure out what's happening and fix this. So first there was the reactions, and then second I looked up and I realized that actually in the collapse, my paragliding wing had actually knocked it into itself. So it was actually stuck in a bit of a ball, and it was spiraling me towards the ground. I think there was definitely an element of fear in there, particularly because I happened to be over the only set of power lines which go up this mountain for probably 50 kilometers. And there was a couple of seconds of me trying to sort it out before I then threw an emergency parachute. But in general, I think that the only real sentiments were survival, basically, and just trying to figure out what I needed to do to keep going and to make sure that I didn't die.
And so you threw open your emergency parachute, and then what happened after that?
So effectively I threw open an emergency parachute. The parachute slowed me down pretty significantly as I was coming down towards the mountain. Just before I hit the mountain, another gust hit me just at a bad moment, and it reopened my main canopy, which then slung me 180 degrees straight into the front face of the mountain. And basically on this particular mountain in South Africa, there's these absolutely giant sandstone boulders. So I slung around 180 degrees going exceptionally fast. And I saw the mountain looming up in front of me from probably about 5-10 meters away. And with the older paragliders, they'd always said, look, it's better to break your legs than your back. So if you are going to hit something, stick your legs out, and yeah, you'll break your legs, but hopefully you won't be paraplegic. So instinctively, that's what I did. So I still today, I can very vividly see the mountain looming, and basically then I just hit the mountain, and a few seconds later found myself lying in a fairly difficult situation in between a bunch of scrub on the back end of it.
Oh my gosh.
So Shane, were you knocked unconscious straight away? Tell us about the impact. I mean, obviously you were left with severe physical injuries.
Yeah, that's correct. So I later found out, I mean, basically I was lying on this mountain on the other side, and I had this absolutely just unimaginable pain that radiated from the center of my back. So I was pretty convinced that my back was actually broken. And I also had these two ankles which looked like balloons, and they were absolutely excruciating as well. Although, to be honest, my back was so uncomfortable that I don't even think I really noticed them. So at no stage did I pass out. I was really fortunate that basically what happened was I hit the mountain with my feet. My legs took most of the impact, so it crushed probably the bottom 4 or 5 centimeters of each of my ankles, and then I hit my back, which then broke my back, and I then flipped over. There was only 2 people that actually saw it happen. One of them was a friend of mine who was flying just behind me when it happened. And another guy was a farmer who just happened to be standing on the only road up this mountain taking photos. The friend of mine came into the hospital some hours later when I'd finally been taken off the mountain and etc. And he reckoned what happened was he basically saw the collapse happen. He saw me spiral down, hit the mountain, and then do effectively a double somersault through my wing and then smash into the mountain on the other side. So I was completely conscious, and all I remember at the time was that my radio started going absolutely crazy, so I could hear all my friends going, pilot down, can you hear us, etc. And unfortunately, in the accident, I lost the ability to communicate with them, so I was screaming into this radio trying to get their attention, but no one could hear me. So really, the thing that I remember is just this absolutely unimaginable discomfort. So if anyone ever asks, and which they do very often, what's it like to break your back, for me, it was just the most uncomfortable feeling I've ever felt in my life. And all that my body wanted to do was move, to move away from it, I suppose, to try and put the vertebrae back together. And knowing that my back was likely broken, and that if I did move, it'd probably be the last time I did it. I did everything I could not to. So I ended up biting my hands and pinching my face, and eventually actually just smacking my head on rocks to try and just get away from it.
So I guess also it's not just the injuries that you suffered, it's also the fact that you were left then deserted on a mountainside. I guess nobody was with you at the time. How did help eventually come?
Yeah, so I mean, one of I suppose my golden rules for flying was that I didn't fly alone. I mean, I had a couple of times, but I typically didn't. So I was actually flying with quite a few other pilots at the time. Now, because we were spread out over this mountain that was probably 40 or 50 k's long, there was only actually a couple of guys who were within close proximity of me. So I was lying on this mountain, sort of riding around trying to figure out what to do. About an hour later, I heard crashing through the bushes and this basically this guy that looked like a ghost turned up, and it turned out that he was a farmer that had been taking photos, and he actually expected to find me dead on the other side of the mountain. So he just completely freaked out, and he just said to me, "What can I do? What can I do?" So I said to him, "Well, look, chill out. I'm still alive, and it's all good. So please take your phone out. I don't know where mine is, and I can't move clearly. So please phone the emergency helicopter and try and get them to come, and then go back down to the road. Friends of mine should probably arrive at some stage, and then bring them up." So what then, I suppose, transpired was that South Africa, being South Africa, the emergency helicopter was busy, so they couldn't come pick me up. So he then found friends of mine who came up. They then called an ambulance who arrived probably another hour later, and these guys then came up. And I suppose the thing that, just to set the scene, the thing that was really, really fortunate for me is there's quite literally one road up this mountain for probably 40 kilometres. I mean, it's a big mountain. It's probably, I don't know, 500 or 600 metres top to bottom at least, if not higher. And there's quite literally just one road that goes up this thing, and everywhere else it's just rugged wilderness. So I happened to crash about 400 metres from it in sort of fairly dense scrub. So eventually paramedics rocked up, and given that the helicopter was going to take another 4 or 5 hours and they needed to stabilise me, they effectively pumped me full of morphine and put me on a backboard, and then along with about 6 of my mates, they actually managed to carry me the 400, 500 metres through the bush, across the rocks, out back to the road.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, we've got spine tingles here, and because we kind of knew a bit of your story from Sydney, but we didn't quite know it to this depth. Blimmin' heck! I mean, you've got to take the wins. You've got to take the wins, I suppose. Thank goodness you did it next to the road. Good golly. So after all of this, you're actually calming people down. I mean, how amazing is that? You're in a state of brokenness and you're able to calm the poor old farmer down. I mean, that just shows the power of the mind as well, and the power of the human spirit, what we've got. And then you get carried away, get carried 400 metres through the bush. I'm sure that was a bit of a rocky ride as well. And then you end up in hospital. So what was the diagnosis in hospital, and how did that journey occur?
Yeah, well, there was actually there was a little bit in between that as well. So basically, where I was actually probably about 3 hours north of Cape Town, near a place called Porterville, which is a fairly well-known international big thermal flying site, but it's out in the middle of nowhere. So I ended up in this very tiny little rural hospital, and a friend of mine then phoned my girlfriend and said, "Look, your husband Shane's had a paragliding accident. He's alive. Maybe you should come check it out." And that was about it. So she was completely freaking out. So she did a 3 hour drive in about an hour and a half. And she rocked up, and I was in this sort of country hospital, and fortunately the nurses were pretty rough. So they were sort of picking up my leg, and my ankle felt like it really broke in between. And then an ambulance rocked up, and they took me back to Cape Town, which took, I think, about 4 hours in the ambulance. And the road to get from Porterville back to the main highway was pretty rough. So we were kind of bouncing over these undulations, and as we did it, it kind of felt like my legs were breaking again every time it happened. But I then eventually rocked up in hospital, I think at about 11 or 12 p.m. And it's all a little bit of a blur, but I distinctly remember them taking me through. One of the things, funnily enough, which stuck out was I had these zip-off pants that my girlfriend had bought me, and I tend to be a bit of a minimalist. So I'd had this old pair that had holes all over them that I'd worn for probably 5 years, and she bought me this new pair for Christmas that I refused to use for a while because I was like, oh well, there's no point destroying the new pair. So this was the first day that I decided to use this new pair of pants, and it happened. I then had this accident. So the first thing they did was they cut my pants off. So she was pretty pissed off with me.
Of all the days, Shane, of all the days you could have worn those trousers, that was the bloody day.
Because I find it really...
That was exactly the attitude. So they cut my pants off. And then they took me into the Xray theatre, and basically proceeded to do the most painful Xrays, I think, imaginable. I mean, they literally took my leg, and I was lying on my back because they couldn't move me. and they would twist my leg around the side. So effectively, when I impacted, they found out through these X-rays, etc., that I'd actually broken 3 bones in each leg. So I'd broken the tibia and the fibula, which are your 2 lower leg bones that make up your shin and the area between your knee and your ankle. And then there's this bone, which, to be honest, I didn't even know existed before this, but it's called the talus, and effectively it's like a spherical, elliptical shaped bone that sits just beneath those 2 and effectively makes up your ankle joint. Now, if you talk to people like chiropractors or physios, they call it the keystone of the body because all of your weight comes through that. So I'd broken on both sides, the talus, the tibia, and the fibula, and I'd broken my talus bad enough, particularly on the left, where part of it had just kind of turned into dust. And I'd then also broken, I think, the L4 vertebra in my back that had split in half and had kind of exploded. But I think in terms of that experience, it was just insane. I mean, even through the morphine, through all the painkillers, the amount of pain with them twisting my legs around to try and x-ray them was just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking, Shane, there'll be listeners now hearing your story, just thinking, how can you survive that level of pain? Do you think there's something within us that when we are in a situation of such suffering, there is another part of us that kicks in? I mean, before you had the morphine, you must have been lying on the mountain in desperate pain. Or do you find, looking back on it, there were endorphins released that helped you survive that at that time?
Yeah, I think you're completely right, Sue, that there's far more to the human body and the human mind, I think, than any of us really views consciously. And I mean, one of the things that the doctors said to me later, weeks into it, when I kind of recovered a bit, was that actually I was super lucky that I injured myself while doing what they considered a fairly high risk activity. And the reason being that in that situation, they were saying that your body is already, to an extent, ready, because you already have adrenaline and endorphins and all these other things flowing sort of in the proximity that mean that as soon as an accident happens, you're already healing yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, I think for me, what I found was that humans and probably most animals have this innate capability to survive. So yeah, I mean, as I said, like when I was on the mountain, I don't know if it was painful so much as it was just uncomfortable. Like it was quite literally just the most uncomfortable, most I don't know, just insane feeling I've ever felt. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I was trying to kind of use a state of mindfulness just to get away from it, because I knew if I did move that it was going to be much more problematic for me. But I do definitely think that in these moments that you realise that there is this core resilience that we all have that we often don't really call upon until those times where we really need it.
Yeah. So, Shane, we're interviewing lots of different people about their stories, and I think what I find particularly interesting is how do people survive? I used to coach rowing, and I was fascinated at the time the extent to which you could push students through pain and whether their endurance could translate into emotional and psychological resilience because of the pain levels that they could accept or overcome. And I'm just wondering, in terms of, is there something within all of us innately that enables us to survive, and that it can translate from physical pain? How do we survive physical pain? And also, how do we survive psychological and emotional pain? What within us kicks into that survival mode to help us? And obviously, in your situation, there was also emotional pain. There was a long journey of healing as well.
Yeah, so I suppose to answer your question, I think that in the accident itself and in the events that immediately preceded it, it basically became a part of, you're just there and you're just reacting. And to be honest, given that after a while I had this morphine and stuff, you kind of go into this weird sort of semi-ethereal state where you kind of are and aren't quite with it. So time has this weird character, and you're basically just drugged up. When things really changed for me, I think, was first of all, there was a moment where about 2 days after the accident, I came out of emergency surgery at about 2 a.m. that they'd just done on my back, and we passed my anaesthetist. And as we were entering ICU, he turned around and he said to me, "Look, your spinal cord's badly bruised, your back's not in good shape, but your spinal cord's intact, and we think you should be able to walk again." And at that moment, that was the very, very first time after about 48 hours of this whole thing that I actually just completely broke down. And I think what you find is that there's this part of us that kind of turns off our emotional brain, and we use that limbic brain, that reptilian sort of fight or flight response. So I think that was when my conscious caught up with my subconscious and went far out. I actually was quite possibly never going to walk again. Now I think I'm going to, and just everything just came flooding. So I had that experience, and then about 2 weeks later, I think was when I finally, so it's 2 weeks after the actual accident was when I properly kind of, I think, realised what was happening.
It's amazing, isn't it, how our body goes into fight, flight or freeze mode. And I think what happens as well, obviously, them first 2 weeks you were in so much trauma that I think the brain and the body is so clever that it shuts things down for us, because we can only actually cope with a certain amount before we implode or explode. So I think it sounds to me like your body went into a trauma but also in a survival mode. So you were in that place for 2 weeks, and you hear that bit of news which is like a seed, a thread that you can then cling on to, and that must have been that huge emotional release for you. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, correct. And I think, I completely agree with you. I think that definitely that the first probably 2 weeks or so, I was just stuck in this thing, and you're in it, but you kind of don't even realise you're there because you are just stuck in the situation. When it really changed was at about the 2 week mark for me, which was when I sort of woke up in bed one day and just realised how absolutely stuffed I was, that I still couldn't roll over. I was still getting suppositories just to poo all over myself, and that I wasn't going to walk for probably months and months, and that life had changed. And I think when that happened was when really I felt myself going into this negative headspace, and those questions that you hear people talk of started popping up. Why me? Why am I not going to be able to walk for a long time? I'm never going to be able to run again. It's going to suck sitting in hospital for this long, etc., etc. And it was phenomenal that at this time, somehow, not really through any conscious thought, the thought popped into my head, well, yep, you can think this way, but it's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible for everyone, because you're going to become depressed. Whether you become depressed or not, you're still going to be here, and your girlfriend's going to have to come visit you, and your friends are going to come visit you. But the more agitated you are, and the more frustrated you are, the less people are going to want to do that. And I sort of sat there in that moment thinking, well, is getting frustrated going to help me, or is it not going to help me? And is it going to help those around me, or is it not? And fairly quickly realized that it just wasn't, that there was nothing positive that would come of frustration or anger or fighting the situation. And that actually, flying had been this experience that had sort of absolutely illuminated or provided so much positivity to my life for such a long time. I'd seen things that, probably 1/1,000,000th of the people in the world ever will, from the curve of the world to flying. There's this experience when you're flying on something that's made of a few strings and a bit of fabric, and you're going upwards at 30 kilometers an hour, being powered by an invisible current of air that's just absolutely mind-blowing. And I didn't regret it. And that was when, for me, it changed from just surviving to actually getting to a situation where I actively was trying to glide through my situation, or to allow the situation just to happen and just to react to it positively and refocus on those things. So I think for me that was where things really fundamentally changed, and where I started building what I now see as a positive psychology or positive philosophy, which became Glide to Soar, which I can explain. For my girlfriend, I think, unfortunately, things were probably, as you can imagine, really difficult. And the problem for her was that she was out of the situation. So although I was getting all this love and support and attention, which she was as well from our friends, because she wasn't the one that was injured, she would have to go back to an empty house every night. And given that I was the person that was injured, I couldn't even be there to support her. So I think that she really struggled, and she struggled with the fact that, you know, will Shane walk again? If he doesn't walk again, what's life going to be like? What's it going to be like for, you know, his income now, and all of those very, very rational things that you think about. And then obviously just the emotional, I suppose, trauma of seeing your loved one lying there completely broken. So I think my process of recovery and the emotional situation, which I was in, the emotional situation she was in, were different. But again, I mean, so I think her approach to getting through things was different. But for me, she was quite a rock in terms of the fact that she would just be in there every day with a smile, and that she just helped me recover. So it was quite an amazing experience.
Shane, as you're talking, you remind me of a book called If This Is a Man, and there was a follow-up called The Truth, and it was written by a guy called Primo Levi who survived Auschwitz. And If This Is a Man was all about the journey going through Auschwitz and how horrific it was and the pain and the suffering he endured. And then The Truth was the follow-up book, and The Truth was written after he came out, and it's the journey of recovery. And when you read the two books side by side, it's interesting that the journey of recovery was much harder than the original book, If This Is a Man, because he was in survival mode, and he was in obviously that place where the adrenaline kicks in and you just have to endure the circumstances you're in. And it kind of makes me think so much about circumstances that listeners are going through, where you're enduring severe suffering, trauma, pain, adversity, conflict. And when that's over, when that's finished, whether it's physical or emotional or psychological, there's a period of recovery afterwards. There's a period where we have to make choices. And I think you've touched upon that. You've said that choice was really important to you, and Joe and I are very much about encouraging people into the power of positive intention. And do you think, my question to you is are some people born with the ability to make positive choices and some people born with less power ability to do so? Or is it something that we're all able to do? Because obviously you either go into victimhood or you can use your story situation like you have to empower yourself. Do you think some people are born with that ability, or is it just something you have to grit your teeth and just make a determined effort each day that this is going to be something I'm going to overcome?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fundamentally believe that, my fundamental belief is that as people, we are capable of far, far more than we enable ourselves to do, or that our conscious brain realizes, and that at times there's these catalysts, if you want to call them, that enable us to realize these things. So, I mean, the idea of choice and the idea of being able to focus on the positive, it's something it's absolutely something we all have. And the key point is that all it is fundamentally realizing that the situations that impact us are not us. And it sounds slightly esoteric, I suppose, but it's the idea that actually negativity or negative situations are only negative because of how we perceive them. So when we change our mindset towards them, we actually take away that power for them to impact us. And so take for example, take for example something like getting retrenched from work. Now in the Western sense, it's not a positive experience. It's not something that you would look for. But if you simply accept that situation and you find the opportunities which are always inherently there, it becomes this opportunity to change what we're doing, and often to actually find better employment or better opportunities than we had before. And I've funnily enough, in my relatively short career, I've actually been retrenched twice, and in both instances, I've come out far better off than I was in the first instance with the company that I was working for. So yeah, I think really that we all have that capability. It's purely the belief that we can do it, and then it's secondly noticing that we're going into a negative spiral, and then actually taking the opportunity to step back and say, this is not how I want to do things, and I would prefer to refocus on the positives and actually getting better.
So Shane, what would you say to listeners that are on board listening to the podcast who say, but Shane, you don't understand how hard it is. You've no idea of the suffering I've been through. Yours was an accident that you could recover from, but mine's an emotional relationship breakdown. I can't survive. I can't make that choice. I can't find a way to actually be empowered. What advice would you give for somebody that's feeling they're just in darkness and it's bleak and it's black and they don't know actually how to make that choice, how to get out of bed in the morning, how to get out of the depression?
And look, I completely understand your question, Sue, and I think that there is a difference between having a physical event happen to you and the emotional trauma attached with that, and having an ongoing emotional situation which you're based in. And funnily enough, I've actually been in a bit of a situation like that for some months, going backwards with work, where I was getting to a point of burning out, and I knew all this stuff that I'd developed in terms of reframing and refocusing my attitude and the experience from the paragliding accident, and even I found it difficult at that time to get to a point of being able to get through it. So what I realized in that situation is a couple of things. The first step is that we actually just have to accept the situation we're in. So having gone through the paragliding accident and having compared that to the situation I had recently with work and with sort of general motivation, what I realized is that actually where the fundamental problem I was having was coming from, that I hadn't accepted the situation that I was in. As soon as I, at a gut level or at a very, very deep level, accepted the situation from what it was, my instinct to fight against it and the capacity or the energy that I was using to constantly fight the situation just went away. And what that meant was that as soon as I made that step of acceptance, it enabled me to actually start moving towards something positive. The second step is that you've got to find out what you need to do to get better or to reframe. And part of that is in an emotional situation, actually just getting out of that situation. So we always have a choice. We always have a choice. The thing is that some of the time we're in a headspace which makes it really difficult to make those choices, and B, often the choices we have to make are actually choices that we don't want to make, or they're difficult choices, but we always have that choice and we have to make them in order to move forward. The next thing becomes the fact that we've really got to find a way to work with the situation, so that instead of constantly fighting it and as a result wasting our energy on it, focusing on the things that will get us better. Now, fascinatingly, one of the things that I've read a lot about recently and that I've found to be true is the fact that people seem to have this belief that motivation comes, or that action comes from motivation, and that when we are motivated, we act. Whereas instinctively, what often happens is that when we act, we actually get motivated. So we do something which has an outcome, or which, whether it be washing the dishes or otherwise. And because we've done that thing, we kind of feel this load lift of our shoulders, and therefore we feel more motivated to do the next thing. And riding on that motivation, so just doing very, very small things a day, or just doing very small acts consistently, means that we then pull out of that other problem that we're in, and we end up being able to find a way out of it.
Love it. Somebody said to me the other day, we don't smile, Sue, because we're happy. We actually smile and then we feel happy because of the action we've taken, because our face muscles have actually changed and therefore we feel happy. I love it. I love the fact also, when you wrote to us, you said that adverse situations are an unavoidable part of life, but that success can be reached through conscious choice. Now, I know you've published a book, or you're about to publish a book. Is this in your book?
No, so I haven't actually published a book. I've published a bunch of articles, particularly through. So following the accident that I had over in South Africa, we actually the big thing that got me through it, to be honest, was that for years I'd been dreaming about going through Africa. So I'm from South Africa originally, and I'd had this absolute dream about re-experiencing the continent that I was from, and just the ideas of explorers like Livingstone and these sort of things, and the things I'd seen. So ever since my university days, I'd been thinking about this thing, and part of what got me through my accident was that I basically just decided, along with my girlfriend at the time, that we were going to go and do this trip through Africa. So, I'd gotten through it, and that if we're all going to obviously pass at some stage, and that before that happened, that was something that I wanted to do. So we began planning it, and we began drawing on maps, and we began doing all these other sorts of things. We then, for about 3 years, worked on that plan. Eventually turned it into an expedition that was sponsored by about 10 major companies, including Suzuki, who was the headline sponsor for the expedition, which ultimately became called Suzuki Africa Sky High, and then went and climbed the 5 highest mountains in Africa. So in terms of the things that I've published, a lot of it was content that followed our trip. So there was a lot of magazines and things that followed it, and there was quite a lot of stories done in that regard, and also photography that was published in various publications, including of the gorillas in Africa, and of some of the areas that we saw, like the ruined Xrays, which is this just absolutely insanely awesome moonscape in the middle of Africa with these snow-capped mountains that no one even knows exist. So that's more the contents around that side. So at the moment, what I'm focusing on outside of my day job, which is developing renewable energy, so wind and solar farms, is trying to actually just inspire other people that we do have a choice about how we live our lives, and that success can be reached, or the best way to reach it is by stopping fighting exactly the unavoidable challenges in life. So there are always things which are going to be difficult. There's always things which pop up, even when, in particular, when we're trying to reach our goals. And the more that we fight those things, the more that we get pushed away from what we're trying to attain. The other idea is that is actually defining success. So often we have this idea in society, particularly in the Western world, that success is material possessions and wealth and fame and recognition and all these things, when actually what we're doing is we're confusing achievement with this thing called success. So for me, the way that I see it, success is a very personalized thing. And to me personally, success includes things like contentment and knowing that the actions that I take are actually helping the broader community and potentially even, people globally, and that I'm helping people become inspired. And then additionally that I'm helping my family, including my wife, who was my girlfriend previously during the accident, and our young daughter, who's now a year old, to grow and to experience life. And then additionally just having these opportunities. So I've started doing some work as a speaker and really just trying to get out there and do those things. So hopefully one day there'll be a book, but at this stage there's not.
I think it'd be a very fascinating book, Shane, for goodness sake. It's like, 1 minute you're in a hospital bed and the next minute you're climbing the 5 highest mountains. I mean, that's inspiration personified.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, look, it's interesting that I think in a lot of cases I have been lucky, and I do believe to an extent that luck is made, but I also believe that I have been really fortunate in terms of the experience I've had, and that actually this whole accident and stuff was a really good thing, and that my life has become bigger and better, and I've learned a lot through it. So I think I was lucky to have had it, to be honest.
And I think that's a message Jo and I would love to put out there as well, because she and I have both suffered severely in our lives, and I think when you come through it, it's an amazing experience to look back on, because when you especially just now talked about your trip through South Africa, there's a level of beauty and abundance and joy you can reach and appreciate in a way that maybe you couldn't before you'd suffered. And so to listeners that are in that place of thinking it will never get better, that they will never meet a nicer person, that they will never get over their trauma that they're going through right now, that you do come to a place of such intense peace and beauty and appreciation of life, that you live life in a different way, and just to push on through those dark times, just to hold on, because you do reach a place that's even better than it was before. You can't imagine it when you're in it though, can you?
No, I think it's it is always interesting in retrospect, looking back at these things, and I think while you're in it, there are definitely many moments where you wonder, and as I said, that there's been moments recently in terms of various things where I kind of question why things are happening, but I do have this innate belief that life happens the way it should, and that everything that happens to us has a reason, and that ultimately the forks in the road or the logs in the path are there for us to learn from. So for me, it's about focusing on those lessons and making sure that I'm learning them rather than fighting the situation itself. Yeah. And from a personal perspective, that's really, really helped for me.
Yeah. I absolutely love your message, Shane. I mean, everything, it's been the same theme throughout. You accept your situation, you ask, what can we do now? And then you choose to focus on the positives. And it sounds like that's kind of the recipe that gets you through most things in life.
Yeah, correct. And I think that as much as that, so to me, the Glide to Soar message that I'm developing is the fundamental premise is that in order to reach the success that we're all striving for, and it's personal success, there's a couple of things. So one is that we have to just accept life as it is. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try and change life. It just means that we don't fight against what happens. So if an event happens, we kind of just accept that event has happened and that we're trying to find a better way out of it. Now, part of it is that you've actually got to try and figure out where you're trying to get to. So what does success mean for you? Does it just mean taking that first step again? Does it just mean getting to a point where you can smile again when you wake up in the morning? Or does it mean going and climbing mountains or building a massive company? And that is very, very individual. So start with the end in mind. From the stage of acceptance, you find that goal or that thing which is driving you, and then you reframe. Rather than focusing on the negatives, you glide through those negative things. So you accept them and you start trying to move towards the positive. And then for me, it's a case of just having a belief that we can do these things, and that life is about more than just drudgery and all of these other things, and actually moving towards those positives. And then the other sort of component of it that I really believe that it's really important for all of us to understand is the fact that negativity and negative events, to an extent, they're a choice, and it's a perception. So if we change our mindset, we can change our world, and we have that ability. I've been there, and I fundamentally know that we have the power to change the way that we see the world, and that has the power to change our world in return.
Yeah, and then when you know that you've got the choice, it's actually quite, it's liberating, isn't it? And it's really, really empowering when you realise you have the choice on every decision.
100%, yeah, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to face difficult situations. And again, that's the other point, is that difficulty is just part of life, and it's there to help us to learn, and it's there to remind us we're alive. And actually, without the difficult times, we'd never know that the good times are good.
Yeah, you've definitely got to have that polarity. Well, Shane, you have been an inspiration. Your story is an inspiration, from literally being broken to being fixed again, and then to go on to achieve some great things, climbing the 5 highest mountains, and now making a difference in the world in the job that you do as well, and also making this new movement of Glide to Soar. We can't wait to see what happens in the future. We are looking forward to your book coming out. We hope that you decide to write one. And yeah, we just thank you, and thank you for inspiring all our listeners, to show them that facing adversity and facing suffering, that there's life after all of that.
Shane, thank you so much for coming on board today. It's been great to have you. Amazing.
Thanks very much, guys, and thanks again for the work that you guys are both doing. I mean, I think it's really sort of inspirational, all the people that you've talked to. But thanks very, very much for the opportunity, and I wish you guys all the very best with what you're doing.
And if you'd like to connect with Shane, he can be found on LinkedIn or Facebook, or on his website, shanequinnell.com. All of the information will be in the show notes. Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Pool. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.